Hi everyone, my name is Brigit Okland and I will be discussing Chapter 4 of Bridging Cultural Barriers, titled Cultures of Our World, Austria, Belgium, Canada, and Central European Cultures. So for Austria, the term East Realm or Ostreich is the root for the name Austria, and it appears in the year 996 for the first time and is the beginning of an ascent to a world power with spheres of influence in the Old and New worlds. In the following countries, its possession included large parts of the German-speaking realm with parts of today's Belgium and the Netherlands, the state of Burgundy in France, large parts of Central Europe, and the Balkans. And Austria's influence included Spain, Portugal, and large parts of Central and South America. So, due to the history as a nation that ruled large parts of the world, including many cultures where conflicts were not always able to be solved by war, allowed Austrians to develop a communication style that is shaped by respect and courtesy in dealings with one another. For example, great diplomatic skill and talent. And similarly, conflicts are usually not addressed directly, but are expressed in a well-packaged formula with the aim of finding a compromise. So the style of cooperation in professional and business life in Austria is shaped by respect and diplomacy towards the hierarchy, which makes the cooperation with other cultures very pleasant and the opposite of the direct communication style of their neighboring country of Germany. So moving on to Belgium, the Belgian soul is characterized by three elements: history, cultural diversity, and the dispute about language, mainly between French and Flemish speakers. Belgium has three official languages. So about 60% of Belgians speak Flemish as their first language and 40% speak French. A minority, approximately 75,000 people in the east of the country, speaks German as their first and official language. Belgium was the first country in continental Europe to be industrialized, with rich deposits of coal and iron, and each region has its own government with a prime minister. So above the regions is the government of the whole country, but divisions run so deep that, for example, at the end of 2011, a new general government could only be formed after Belgium had been without a government for 535 days. So the reading mentions the phrase, every Belgian has a brick in his belly. That means that his goal is a house of his own, and Belgium has in fact one of the highest percentages of home ownership in Europe. And the quality of life in Belgium is determined by the here and now. Food and drink are of great importance, and Belgium is the country with the greatest density of restaurants with Michelin stars. Also in the last century, it was a significant purchaser of top wines. Moving on to communication and conflict resolution, the interaction between and with each other is friendly, characterized by humor, even sprinkled with a dose of self-irony about one's own shortcomings. Understatement is the norm there. The goal of communication is not perfection, it is understanding. And then conflicts are seldom and resolved openly, and the aim is to avoid them. So a popular strategy is to say nothing. The Belgians retreat to a certain bunker mentality in critical situations. Belgians are usually successful business people because they speak several languages. They're able to respond well to other mentalities and operate their businesses with a healthy dose of opportunity. So a quote from the reading said, adaptability, flexibility, and compromise are the ingredients of a successful Belgian businessman. Next, moving on to Canada. So how different is Canada from the United States? Canada as a country is larger, but the entire population is actually smaller than the state of California in the United States. Because of the great distances and the spare population, matching the US infrastructure, like roads and communications, is more complex, making life on average more expensive for a Canadian. And quoted from the book, 90% of Canada's population lives within 150 miles of the US border. And then the country is actually bilingual, and the majority of the US is not. So Quebec is French speaking, as are parts of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And all the road signs in Canada and all government regulations are issued in both languages. So Canadians seem to know America, but America does not quite know Canada as well. Canadians are bombarded with US media, and Canadians follow American affairs closely. So often a Canadian will be shocked to discover that they know more about the US politics than the US visitor themselves. Americans know not that much about their northern neighbors and stereotypically regard Canada as essentially just a good friend, so a politer and gentler version of themselves. And in the reading, one of the headers said, "Is Canada just America light?" And the answer said that it is yes and no. The way of life in Canada mirrors the US in many aspects, but in other critical areas, there are substantive differences, such as in history, politics, government, and social model differences. So you could call Canada a more middle-class environment. Wealth inequality is far less blatant than in the US. And ambitious Canadians know they have to cross the border to make very good money. So some things to remember as you enter Canada on business. Money is a little bit different. So Canada is metric and their dollar notes are mainly plastic and multicolored. There is no $1 or $2 bill, and there are coins affectionately known as loonies because of the bird motif, which I thought was interesting. And interruptions are considered rude in a conversation unless the interrupter asks permission to respond or add a thought. And Canadians are more likely to seek group opinion and consensus before agreeing to further talks. Both Canada and the US take business very seriously. The tone is just more reserved north of the border. So now onto Central European cultures. According to the latest geographical measurements, the center of Europe is located a few kilometers north of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. Central Europe includes the Baltic countries with Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, then Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Each of these countries has its own culture and values, which is why the following information discussed can only outline some broad differences for this region when compared to Western Europe. So some culturally defining elements that are commonalities. Since the ancient migration of peoples and until after the Second World War, these countries have been the scene of armed conflicts with conquests and resettlements. Periods of foreign domination alternated with periods of self-determination and sovereignty, but the uncertainty and danger of hostile intervention remained constantly present. All of the countries in Central Europe share a centuries-old European tradition and history, and the forced occupation, Sovietization, and integration into the system of Soviet satellite states, as well as in the Warsaw Pact from 1944 until 1989 and 1990, are a common experience across Central Europe. Also, the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989 and 1990 in these countries has led to the subsequent political and economic reorientation with the resurgence of their own history and the renaissance of church and religion. Religion also plays an important role in all of the countries. So looking at the language differences of Central Europe, Hungarian and Estonian are Finnish languages. Romanian has Romanesque roots and is related to Italian. Latvian and Lithuanian are the closest to Indo-European languages. There are many words that are borrowed from the German language from the time of the German Teutons. All other languages belong to the Slavic language group, such as Bulgarian, Polish, Czech, and Slovak. So the communication and conflict resolution in these areas are more likely to be determined by the Western Europe. So Monika Makarova sums it up in the reading and says, "We stick together. People are socialized not only in core families, but especially in large families. The family protects the individual, but it demands loyalty from him and her. Thus, the child learns to think in the Western Europe form." And the identity of the individual in Eastern Central Europe is reflected in the social network. To ensure the functioning of this network, it is necessary for it to be enduring, and it is safeguarded by avoiding disputes where possible. Communication is rather indirect in Central European cultures, and this is especially seen in a conflict. Criticism and disagreement are not expressed and dealt with overtly, but in private conversations behind closed doors. And lastly, cooperation in professional and business life for Central European areas. All of the cultures in Central Europe have high levels of power distance in their professional lives. There are higher values for Romania, Slovakia, and Poland than for France. Estonia still lies above Germany. This is similar to what people experience in France, Spain, or Italy, where the manager or chief is paternalistic, like a family father, leading and protecting his employees. And in return, he expects respect and will crack down in an authoritarian manner if the children or the employees, in this case, don't behave. And this also applies to service personnel, such as chauffeurs or server hosts at restaurants. And these are my references. So this was my summary on chapter 4, sections 4.4 through 4.8 on Austria, Belgium, Canada, and Central European cultures. Thank you for listening.